bring back our panel of military vets, former Army Sergeant Dan Hollaway, an Iraq War combat veteran who served with the 82nd Airborne, and former Air Force Technical Sergeant Brandon Gresham. Welcome to you both. Thank you so much for your service. So the nation is really split on this operation. The Democrats are very much against it. The Republicans are very much for it. I want to hear where you guys stand on this. I mean, the cost of this kind of an operation is very real for you. Dan, how do you see things?
Well, the first thing I see is propaganda, right? I mean, and it's two front. One is that the neocons did so much damage to our war-fighting effort. And a lot of people have broken brains and PTSD from that, frankly. And they think that America First means that we just can't use our military ever again, I guess. But there's a few critical lies that I think we need to address. One is this idea that we didn't vote for this. If you say that, you didn't pay attention, because Trump has been discussing taking down the Islamic Republic since October of 1980. You can watch the tape, he's been consistent about it his entire adult life, and in each one of his political campaigns as well. The second lie is they weren't a threat. Tell that to the 241 troops killed in Beirut and the 400 plus of our friends killed by DFPs and IEDs across Iraq. And then the final lie, I guess, is that this was for Israel. And this is a red-green alliance of China and Iran talking point. And they've terrorized the entire world, not just Israel, not even just the United States. Their facilitation of transnational terrorism extends even to our own backyard, with Hezbollah training camps as close as Mexico and the Colombia-Venezuela border. These are all lies. They're CCP propaganda. You can trace them back in large part to a guy named Dr. Jiang Zhuken, who's a Chinese state-adjacent academic commentator, Alex Dugan from this communist from Russia apologist guy. There's dozens of other amplifiers, but the nodes they hit on promote BRICS, Russia-Chinese talking points, specifically U.S. demoralization, anti-war sentiment, and epistemic chaos. Chaos is their point. People have this idea that they're pushing for the right or the left, the Trump collusion thing or whatever. It has nothing to do with that. They want chaos in the country, because when the United States is fragmented, we're weak. That's how it works, right? So I'll say this, the most foolish thing that anybody can do in foreign policy is to be the last person at the table that knows you're at war, right? And we've been at war for 47 years with these guys. And while we didn't elect Trump to start a war, we damn sure elected him to finish one of America's problems that's been going on for a long time with our weak presidents kowtowing these guys for 50 years. I voted for Trump in part because he's serious about sending America's enemies to the grave where they belong.
Brandon, how do you see things?
Well, look, we're not far removed from the evacuation of Afghanistan, closing out the global war on terror. So I think many Americans, especially veterans and active duty service members, are defensively worried about repeating what the last 20 years of that looked like. But so far, the air campaign has been highly successful. I haven't seen any true indication that we're preparing to deploy troops to Iran. I want to be clear. I don't want to see American troops in Iran nation building again. But I think even a majority of those Americans that feel like what we're going through in Iran is justified. And I think that they maintain those beliefs if we never deploy troops and begin a ground war there. And unfortunately, we have lost half a dozen American lives already, God rest them. But we've seen splits like this in American history before. You know, people who've held more traditional Taftian non-interventionism or a more Eisenhower approach to internationalism. But I think part of the confusion is that the political right is going through an identity crisis. The Overton window, what conservatism means, has shifted so much that a lot of people who now identify as right are sort of disaffected from the left. They're not actually conservative in the traditional sense. I think that those people no longer see themselves reflected in what American liberalism means rather than what classical liberalism means. And the right has become a political home for many people who agree on, I think, cultural issues, but have very, very different views on foreign policy and then America's role in the world, which I think Dan did a good job talking about. But the group I'm talking about specifically is this black-pilled isolationist group that believes practicing conservatism, or they think they're practicing conservatism, but really they're operating from a very narrow framework. Dan touched on that with the Israel narrative, but their analysis tends to collapse really decades of geopolitics into an online narrative, I would say, and I think that ignores the reality that the United States' foreign policy is influenced by the rest of the globe and not just the box that these guys really cram us into online.
That's such a great point. I think there was a lot of skepticism in the beginning, myself included, of Secretary of War Pete Hegseth. I'm wondering, Dan, very briefly, we don't have a lot of time left. What do you make of the job that he's doing? What grade would you give him?
I would give him an A+, frankly. You know, it's the job of the Department of War is not to play nice with people. It's not to message. It's to kill America's enemies, period. And that's what he does.
Yeah, Brandon, do you agree?
Completely. Everything Dan said is 100% accurate. And really, the military is one of these organizations that top-down decisions can influence change immediately. And I think that Secretary Hegseth has done a really good job at doing that.
Yeah, you're seeing a real competence, I think, coming out of the administration since the beginning of these strikes. And just in the 30 seconds we have left, Dan, it does seem to me that the president has brought in addition to policy, a kind of resurgence of the idea that masculinity is actually a positive value and something that a society needs. Do you agree with that analysis?
Yeah, that's right. We're the inheritance of 2,000 years of Western civilization in this country. And it starts with masculinity, from Aristotle's natural law to Seneca's logos to the Jews' idea we're made in the image of God to the perfect man in Christianity, Jesus Christ. From the Magna Carta to the Agreement of the People to English common law, the Declaration of Independence, our Constitution and Bill of Rights, it cost us 2,000 years and millions of lives to ensure liberty, and it's worth defending, okay? And men defend it. That's it, period. Act like men, be men, and our culture, which is, by the way, the best culture in the history of the world, will survive. Anyone who threatens that in words or in deed should be escorted off of this planet without hesitation.
Dan and Brandon, God bless and protect you both. Thank you for your service, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.